short while ago, I spoke with our correspondent Ben Fulan in Jerusalem. I asked him what Israel has been saying about its strike in the middle of that crowded Jabaliya refugee camp.
Terry, Israel is justifying this by saying that it has knocked out one of the key Hamas commanders, the commander who is said to have prepared and also executed the October 7 attacks. Hamas denies that any senior official was in the camp at the time of this airstrike. It also justifies this by saying that dozens of combatants were killed in the same tunnels that collapsed under the airstrikes. The IDF gave out that statement earlier, saying that many reports of civilian deaths were a result of this attack. Now, we're not getting exact numbers from them. The numbers we're getting from the Palestinian Health Ministry in the controlled Gaza Strip is somewhere around 50 Palestinians. They don't usually say whether or not these are civilians or combatants in this case. 150 wounded. Hamas itself, interestingly enough, is saying 400 dead. So huge discrepancies here, and you can really tell for the first time when we had this hospital blast just recently, the Al-Ali hospital, there were real doubts about whether or not the health ministry in controlled Gaza was giving accurate numbers because they came out so quickly after the attack. In past conflicts, they have been known to line up with Israeli estimates. In this case, today, what we're hearing is a huge discrepancy between Hamas and the health ministry in Gaza. And what this is all really showing is that this is becoming an information war.
And that was DW's Ben Fulan in Jerusalem. Now, the Israeli military is pushing deeper into Gaza. They say they've destroyed hundreds of militant targets in recent days and are also engaged in fierce hand-to-hand combat with Hamas.
The Israel Defense Forces released footage they say shows its ground troops operating inside the Gaza Strip. While the IDF doesn't reveal the location of its forces, locals report seeing tanks in Gaza City and on the road between the north and south of the enclave. The Israeli army reports killing dozens of Hamas militants in fierce close-quarters combat, with some of the fighting taking place inside the vast tunnel complex, where Hamas is believed to be holding 240 hostages. Rescuing the hostages is one of Israel's stated objectives in Gaza. The other is to wipe out Hamas, on the ground and from the skies. This video, also from the IDF, purportedly shows the airstrike that killed a senior Hamas commander said to be involved in directing the October 7 attacks. Israel claims its airstrikes are targeting militants and military infrastructure. The Hamas-run Health Ministry of Gaza says the attacks have killed over 8,000 civilians. The high death toll has led to international calls for a ceasefire, calls that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has dismissed. He says Israel's forces will not stop until Hamas is no longer able to govern Gaza or threaten Israel again.
Let's bring in Frank Ledwich here. He's a senior lecturer in strategic studies at Portsmouth University and a former UK military intelligence officer. He joins us from Oxford. Frank, I want to first ask you about that strike by the Israeli military on a target in the Jabaliya refugee camp. What do you make of that, given the high number of casualties? What do you make of Israel's justification for that strike, Frank?
Well, good morning, Terry. There's no doubt at all that this was a high-value target, and as such, serious consideration will have been given and deliberate consideration to whether the damage done to Hamas would be justified by the excessive, or damage done to civilians would be excessive in relation to the military target. And as I said, this was a high-value target, so this would have been deliberately considered. It's also worth bearing in mind, of course, as the Israelis say, that civilian casualties are a natural and predictable consequence, as they would say, and I think they're right, of Hamas's strategy. So the question to be asked is the damage done to civilians excessive? And that is something, I think, which we don't yet know, particularly in view of what Ben said concerning the varying casualty estimates.
Now, many countries, Frank, as you know, have expressed their outrage at the cost to civilian lives in Gaza as Israel continues its campaign to wipe out Hamas. Could that outrage not translate into an even bigger security risk for Israel in the short and long term?
I think it could. It was pointed out, I think, by several people, many people, at the outset of these operations, and indeed on the 7th of October and shortly afterwards, that Israel may be walking into a trap. They would say it's a trap into which they have to walk. And that trap, Ben put his finger on it before, is connected very closely with this information war that is going on. And Israeli commanders are more than cognizant of that. I've no doubt at all. There's a lot of pressure from them, from their own political leaders. And on Netanyahu's war cabinet, there's a huge amount of pressure coming down from the US. And that will filter down to the operational level because, and the message will be, every Palestinian civilian you kill is a strike against us. And that all plays into this information war. But Israel has little choice, they would say. We have to walk into this political trap. We have to understand that civilians are a weapon of Hamas, and we have to act accordingly. One would question what their choice is. And then we can get into discussions of ceasefires that are out with this. But all this is part of an information war. And it's an information trap, essentially, into which Israel has to walk.
Gaza has again been plunged into a communications and internet blackout. Frank, do you know if that's been instigated by Israel to support its strategic objectives, or is that just a consequence of the destroyed infrastructure?
Well, Terry, the answer to your question is I don't know. I'm not sure anyone does. However, it would be natural, proper, and normal for Israel to try and cut the connective tissues of its enemy. Russians did that to Ukrainians. Ukrainians would love to do it to the Russians. The communications are what holds a cohesive unit together. And cyber communications or internet communications, of course, are one key element. Hamas will have others. They'll have redundancy in the tunnels. They'll have telephones. They'll have radios even, which will also be attacked, I think, by Israeli electronic countermeasures. But I would suspect this is a deliberate cyber assault by the Israelis to remove that, or at least to damage that connective tissue. But I don't know. It may be a natural consequence of the damage being done.
Frank, thank you very much. That was military analyst Frank Ledwich in Oxford.
Thank you, Terry.
And here's a look at some other developments in the Israel-Hamas war. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken plans to visit Israel on Friday for talks. Blinken also plans to make other stops in the region. Israel's military says 9 soldiers were killed in combat operations in Gaza on Tuesday, bringing the total number of Israeli troops killed since October 7th to 326. And Jordan's King Abdullah has called on the U.S. to support an immediate humanitarian ceasefire that would allow aid convoys to flow into Gaza.